welcome to PM Express tonight. Tonight we'll continue our assessment of this year, the 2018 year, and tonight we're going to be examining how the economy has fared in the last 12 months as we approach the end of the year. It's one of those years that the economy has seen some significant challenges, but the government will also tout some significant achievements as well. And so where do we stand as of now, and what does the future prospects really look like? We'll be examining that tonight on PM Express, and I've been joined tonight on the show by a man who understands this better than most. Professor Peter Quartey is head of the ISA at the University of Ghana, Legon, and joins me on PM Express tonight. Professor Quartey, I'm grateful that you joined us on PM Express.
You're welcome.
Nice
Pleasure.
to have you. Let's start with your general assessment of the economy this year, 2018. How has it been?
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. Just a point of correction, I'm a head of economics division at ISA. Division, yes, I think if you generally look at the macro figures, indicators, we see quite a lot of progress as far as Ghana is concerned. And there are, as economists, there are key indicators we look at, GDP growth rates, which has shown some very decent growth rates, especially the non-oil growth rates. We can also talk about inflation rate, which has reduced to a single digit. That is also contentious, whether a single digit inflation is actually what is the optimal for us as a country. Exchange rate depreciation has not been too good. It's 7.5% as of October 2018. Whereas in 2017 we recorded 4.2%. So you can see that the exchange rate has not performed too well, and that has repercussions on import duties and people's livelihood. So you see quite a number of importers complaining about high import duties and high prices of commodities on the market. Fiscal deficit, that is very good, because you look at where we were in 2016 and where we are now, and we have quite a low fiscal deficit. International trade, if you look at the statistics, for a very long time we've been recording deficits. Now we have a surplus on the primary account, which is also quite encouraging. So in terms of the macro targets, we done quite well. But how has that translated into the micro, in terms of employment, in terms of people's livelihood, in terms of people's incomes? And that is where we have not managed to get there yet, because it takes a bit of time for some of the macro statistics to translate into micro numbers, and that requires conscious effort to do. So in terms of employment, I don't think we have up-to-date statistics on that, but we see growing unhappiness or growing concerns about unemployment. In terms of incomes, we haven't seen any substantial increase in our wages, although rate of inflation is going down. Doesn't mean our real incomes are the same, but there's inflation, so our real incomes have been declining. So that's why you feel people will start feeling the pinch now, because your income cannot match, or you cannot afford the same amount of commodities you used to consume in the last year or 2 or 3 years ago. So that's where we are in terms of our economy. But I see some good initiatives that have been proposed in the 2019 budget. And the point I make and continue to make is, if we are able to raise revenue, especially domestic revenue, and achieve 70 to 80% of what has been outlined in the budget statement, come end 2019, 2020, I believe most Ghanaians will be very excited.
You raised a very important point about revenue, something that we'll touch on. I think it's one of the recurring challenges that this government has had to battle with. And they're doing a lot of things, the tin registration, etc., that they're trying to expand the tax net. But and so before we even go into some specifics on the back of what you just said, so having assessed it generally, if you were to, and I know you do that here with your students every time, if you were to give marks on a scale of 0 to 10, 2018 economy-wise, what score would you give the economy?
I will confidently give a 7. 7 out of 10. Yeah, I think, because see, when you get your macro targets right, you get your fundamentals right, it translates into the micro.
So the fundamentals are right for
you? Yeah, they are right for us to, you know, it's now requires us to make conscious effort to get some of these good numbers to translate into the micro figures, so that people will feel a lot of this improvement on the macro front. Because as businesses, you see, if, for instance, let me give you a typical example. If business owners are able to forecast based on the exchange rate, business owners realize that depreciation, inflation is not on the increase. It gives you the confidence to plan, to employ, to produce more. So that is one of the things that you require. And the private sector is the engine of growth. If you want to really grow the economy, employ more people, businesses should have confidence. They should be able to project into the future and plan.
Okay. So let's do that now. So the macro is edging towards a positive, and 7 over 10 is a very, very, very good score for this year as far as the economy is concerned. And you've touched on the next big question, which is the disconnect between the macro and the micro. The president, when he met the press a few days back, made the point that it's just a matter of time before this reflects. In fact, he was clear and emphatic that if you look at, because a constant refrain has been, we don't feel it in our pockets. And he says, if you consider free SHS, for example, people are not paying school fees anymore. If you consider LEAP, which they said they have revived, HIS, they've paid, and so you can access, there is far more money in your pocket now than before. It's a controversial statement. What's your own assessment of that? We've talked about the macro. At the micro level, that's where the problem is. But that is where the majority of us feel it. The economists will see the macro, we will see the micro. At the micro level, what are we getting wrong? What's the problem?
Well, I think, yes, the president is right in saying it might take time, but it shouldn't take too long. Because once these things happen, there has to be conscious efforts to try and get a micro to also kick in. And there are several things that has to be done. For instance, in terms of people feel it in their pocket, yes, there's free SHS, but then if real wages have been going down, if you take out inflation out of your real wages, it means it's gone down. So how much are we saving through free SHS, and how much are we losing in terms of inflation?
If I counter that by saying that incomes and wages is a factor of the market forces. I mean, the market will determine. The private sector is an engine of growth, we say. The private sector will have to determine that based on what the market is saying. And the market is controlled by, if you believe in the economists who believe that leave the market to operate and don't control it, everybody will see their level. And those businesses who pay higher income, those who not, will die. You can't blame government for that.
Yeah, but Evans, you and I know that in our part of the world, government employs a greater number of people. So when government comes out to increase salaries, wages, then the private sector tries to...
There's a knock-on effect.
Yeah, knock-on effect. So the government hasn't done it, then the private sector obviously might do it, but might not be as significant as... And in some places you find that people are actually even being paid lower than the minimum wage rate because there are no jobs. So government should take the lead. Yeah, in the private sector. So government has to take the lead by ensuring that our incomes, our real incomes, at least remains constant. When that happens, then the private sector would also follow. When we had the new wage increases across the public sector, the private sector had to respond. And that's how our economy operates. So we need to do more in terms of that. And then come to free SHS. Yes, it's a good policy because an educated population is much better than an uneducated one. So that is good. But I feel that we are creating a system where eventually we are paying in the sense that now there's double track system. Children come home, they will spend 2 months, 3 months at home. So what do you do as a parent? You have to pay for extra classes. So if you look at all of this, maybe eventually we are perhaps even paying more than if there were no free SHS. You go to the schools, how much they are being fed on is woefully inadequate, because how much money government allocates to boarding schools cannot feed them very well. So parents end buying stuff and sending to schools. And so I believe we need a holistic assessment of all of this to see whether really with some of these policies we are better off or worse off in terms of our incomes.
Let's stay with the free SHS, because this 2018 has been a very significant year for this policy. In that, when it was rolled out last year in September, the cost of it, everybody thought, wow, how are we going to bear this? And then they said we're going to get it from oil, and we've rarely survived doing it. However, 2018 and 2019 is when all the streams come on board, and we've seen the figures. We're talking about billions of cedis that we have to put in. The sustainability question has been asked 1 million times. We haven't, I doubt if the government has given us any answer that is totally convincing. Have you been convinced about the sustainability of this, based on all that you've heard so far?
I have raised questions about the sustainability of free SHS. I think at the Joy FM scorecard, I was there and I put it to the Deputy Minister that I think the current scheme we operate in is not sustainable. Funding scheme is not sustainable. Why do I say that? We are currently in the 2019 budget allocating 1.6 billion cedis towards free SHS. But even that is not adequate. We are allocating 95 million cedis towards one district, one factory, 380 million towards planting for food and jobs. Look at the difference between these big, great flagship programs and free SHS. Massive. So what it means is that we are committing a lot of our resources on free SHS. What about basic schools? What about the other tertiary education? So for me, I think the way forward would be for government to find an alternative in funding it. It is a good policy, I must say, and I'll continue to
What alternative will you propose?
Alternative would be government should pay tuition fees and allow parents to pay for,
regardless of
boarding facility,
whether you can afford or not.
And then those who cannot afford, we can do means testing, scholarship, and then pay. Sometimes we say we cannot do it. Then why do we have LEAP when we have 240,000 beneficiaries on LEAP? If the LEAP methodology is not good, that means we are saying we are throwing our money away. But if the LEAP methodology is good and we are putting money into LEAP, then we should adapt the LEAP approach and make it better.
The same way you identify the LEAP beneficiaries, use that same approach on a bigger scale to identify those who actually need help at the SHS level.
Exactly. You have about 480,000 students. You know where the students are. They fill forms. You place them. Your parents' background. You can check this. LEAP has 240,000 beneficiaries. So you can scale it up and make it better. And I believe we can do it as a country. That's number one. We can also say that, look, we are going to target certain schools. The grade A schools, if your child went there, you'd pay. And then grade B or C will be free. But then there are some needy but brilliant students. If they find their way in the grade A schools, we use the means testing to pay for them so that they go to the grade A school. That is an option.
Government rebut to that has been, you're just going to widen the gap between the have and the have not. As in, the schools that are already good, they're very well resourced, because myself and yourself will take our kids to the all the brilliant schools, the Achimoters of this world, and we'll leave the poor schools for the poor people, and that will...
We'll not leave them. If you are brilliant and you qualify you are needy and you qualify for the grade A schools and there's scholarship for your child to go, then that is fine. But if you want it free, then you can send your child to the C, and when you do that, you can save resources and resource the grade C and other schools at the moment. I don't think the current scheme is sustainable. We can try different options. There are several options we can try, and I believe we will save a lot of money. You see, one point I continue to make is that I cannot afford to pay my child's school fees, but I cannot afford to buy an ambulance to follow me everywhere I go in case I fall, I collapse. I cannot afford to buy a hospital bed and then take it to the hospital anytime I'm going on admission. So I would rather prefer government does this for me and rather allow me to pay for my child's school fees. And there are many in the country who would like this option. I believe the finance minister once hinted that we should start a debate on the funding because it is a toll on us. The Ministry of Finance is struggling to raise the needed resources. You've seen our revenue figures. We are not able to meet our revenue targets. So why do we continue to fund? And year on year, we are increasing the budget. And even yet, we say it is not adequate. So why do we continue to make it free? And let me also point it out that because it's free, people from the neighborhood, from neighboring countries are taking advantage. There are some hostels, boarding facilities. They bring their children. They go through our basic schools, free SHS, secondary school. They go into the boarding houses, free. Once you go through secondary education, if you're a foreigner, they enter the university as local students. I have seen instances where people have come, you question them, say, yeah, I schooled here. I had my secondary education, so I am paying local fees. When we could earn dollars, foreign currency, which country in Africa does this? We are a poor country trying to raise revenue, yet we have opened our borders for others to come in and take advantage of our secondary education without paying for it. When we need money to fix our hospitals, to fix our roads. Point. So I think
that we're not even charging the foreigners to school here at the senior high school level, that they also can come in and benefit of the back of this. Exactly. It hasn't happened anyway. Even in the UK, which is has all these fantastic social policies introduced, the NHS there, if you're a foreigner, if you're traveling, you have to feel that you are not going there for any health. I don't know if you've applied to the UK recently. You have to feel that you are not going there for any health purposes because they have to discriminate in favor of their citizens.
Those are where they used to stamp your visa. It's even stated in your visa that you don't recourse to public funds.
Exactly.
So it's there. So why are we doing this to our country? We have our neighbors of foreign. They are good, good neighbors. Yes, we are part of ECOWAS, but we cannot have this blanket policy. In the EU, or in the EU countries, they have foreign fees and they have EU fees.
Yes.
So you can't.
I went to school in the UK. I paid £15,000 for my masters. My colleagues who were citizens were paying £5,000. That's a significant difference.
It is. And then for them, they take a loan. They take a loan.
Exactly. They benefit
from a loan. Then when they finish, they start working. They pay for it. But why is ours free? So I think. Great initiative, great policy, which I commend government for it. But I think the funding scheme is not sustainable. We need to find a way out of this.
We've just talked about, Prof just touched on revenue, which is a big part of the conversation in 2018. When we return from the break, we'll be looking at that as against the targets that the IMF and that's agreed to set that may dictate whether we exit the IMF program or not. The current government is determined to exit the IMF program at the end of it, December ending and into 2019. We'll say bye-bye to the IMF. The president at the Meet the Press was confident that this will be the last time that Ghana will be going to the IMF. But is exiting the IMF a foregone conclusion? Looking at our revenue challenges, and we have to meet these revenue targets. What does the IMF say in September when they did their 7th review? We'll interrogate that and whether we can exit. And if you do, what that will mean for this economy after the break. Stay with us. So live on PM Express, we are assessing the economy in 2018 and looking ahead to 2019. My guest is Professor Peter Quartey. Prof, just before the break, you were talking about the free SHS and how our revenue challenges is posing a threat to making it sustainable, and that's one of the key things that the IMF picked on in their 7th review. And I want to quote what it says. It says, program performance has been affected by external and domestic factors. Available fiscal data through end July point to much expenditure front-loading on goods and services and lower than programmed revenue, especially VAT and import duty. And this is a crucial bit. On this basis, achieving end December fiscal targets hinges on strengthening both expenditure discipline and tax compliance beyond measures adopted in the mid-year budget review. Now, if you take out this statement, it tells me that exiting the program isn't the foregone conclusion at all. That, as it says, on the basis, we have to achieve end December targets. But that hinges, that hinges on, as it says, strengthening both expenditure discipline and tax compliance beyond measures adopted in the mid-year budget. If you listen to the president when he addressed the media, he was confident that we will meet the targets and we will exit. But this says you have to achieve these targets first. What's your reading of when the IMF says that we have to, it hinges on these factors? What's your reading of it? Is it a foregone conclusion as the president wants us to believe?
No, the president is very confident it's going to happen.
But end of year is just a few days away.
The numbers point towards, we get in there, but we require some doubling of efforts. But I have heard the GRA boss come to assure us that look, they will meet
the target.
their revenue targets. And you've also seen, if you be reading the papers, you see a lot of announcements, efforts to get tax defaulters to honor their tax obligations. Yeah. So I believe there are some conscious efforts to increase our revenue and try to meet the target. But you see, the overall is the fiscal, the deficit.
Yes.
And it's an issue of revenue and expenditure.
Yeah.
So oftentimes when the revenue targets are not met, then government has to work on the other, that is expenditure. My fear sometimes has been that it is capital expenditure that suffers. Goods and services, wages and salaries and the rest do not suffer. And if you don't spend on capital goods, that is invest, it's going to affect your growth targets, your growth numbers. Subsequently, it's also going to affect employment and many other areas. Yes, it's an uphill task, but I think it's doable.
You think it's doable to exit?
Yeah, doable
meet the target. I've heard some of your other colleagues suggest that we might have an arrangement with the IMF and say some of these targets, we've not hit it 100%. We haven't hit the bullseye, but let's have an arrangement where we exit and still keep the discipline and achieve it maybe in the short term. You think that arrangement is possible?
I think that arrangement is might be the second best option, an option that will be considered. We might not hit all the targets 100%. There will be some shortfalls. But I believe the IMF, normally they dialogue, they negotiate, they look at your efforts and say, yes, where we have reached, we think you were almost there but couldn't, and therefore, you could go. But you see, we shouldn't see the IMF, one point I like to make is as an enemy. Oftentimes when we talk about IMF, we think of the headmaster with a cane, kind of thing.
Because of our history, structural adjustment and all those.
Yeah, but we've moved a lot from.
I'm very skeptical.
Exactly, we've moved initially. IMF came with conditionalities. World Bank came with conditionalities. Now, it is our targets that they hold us to. Things have really changed. We've come a long way. No, IMF will not come and set targets for you. Your own targets. Sometimes even the donors now, what they do is that we have our GPRS. We have our annual progress report that the NDPC reports every year. So that's what they meet. They look at and review whether you are meeting your targets as you set in your medium-term development framework. So it's not a bad thing. Ideally, it would be good if you had your own homegrown policies and strategies and achieve your results. But if you're unable to achieve it in certain areas because of credibility issues and the rest, and the IMF comes in, I think we should embrace it and work and exit honorably. Oftentimes, when they even exit, IMF provides, apart from the PERS, they provide technical assistance. So even when they leave, they don't shut down their country office. They still give us advice, technical assistance, and keep checking our debt sustainability and many other things. So yes, it's not the best to be on an IMF program, but when we exit, we still benefit from the IMF.
Let's talk about the exit now. 2019, post-IMF, the discipline that the IMF has given us, but we shouldn't also forget the overarching reason we went, policy credibility. Post-IMF 2019, how do we maintain these benefits and grow them even?
It's very critical. You see, we don't want to prove to the whole world or show to the whole world that without IMF, we cannot stand on our feet. I think we have to stick to some of the programs and initiatives that we have agreed to or that we are embarking on, so that even when IMF leaves, we'll still stay within target. We are likely to do that as a country. Where I have a challenge is 2020. Because oftentimes, election year. Oftentimes, we're able to achieve our targets as much as possible and maintain that credibility or discipline to a large extent. But when it comes to election year, I don't know whether what comes to us, what enters into us, we change completely. 2016, as of September, October, we were right on target. If you look at the figures, we were right on target. Then the last 3 months, elections becomes like do or die. We have this winner takes all syndrome. So once it gets to election years, you forget about IMF or any other thing you have agreed on, and start cutting sword, initiating new programs, and by the time we realize we have overshot most of our targets, then we spend the next 3 or so years to clean up. I think that elections business cycle, if we need somebody to help us. In fact, the last time I posed this question to the IMF managing director, how or what are you going to do to help Ghana overcome this elections business cycle? Once we solve that problem, we'll not have credibility issues at all.
And you've raised that, and I want to quickly shift to one of the biggest challenges the economy faces, which is our debt situation. In 2018, we had, I guess, one of the most ambitious borrowing plans of any government in our history. There's $50 billion century bond that was floated about. In fact, not floated about because the president spoke about it, the finance minister backed it. It's something that he really sincerely planned to do. And it might just happen in 2019, we would go for the century bond. What do you make of it? In 2019, should we do it or should we back off it?
I haven't seen the details of how we're going to strategize or how we're going to carry this through. But I would have thought that, yes, we have agreed on 50 billion, but this will be released in tranches. So it's not going to be all of them going to come in 2019. Yeah. Perhaps in 5 or, bearing in mind our debt sustainability, debt GDP indicators. Yeah. So as and when we are ready, we tap into it and stay within our debt sustainability thresholds. Borrowing itself is not a bad thing if you borrow to invest and also borrow within reasonable levels. It's not a bad thing. We have had in this country where we start projects which hinge on domestic revenue or some revenue realization. Oftentimes, we are not able to find the revenue. So a project that will cost like 100 cedis, by the time it's completed in 10 years, costs 1,000 cedis. Now, if we're able to tap into this long-term finance, this 50 billion, I believe within a year or two, we'll be able to complete a project. We save money. So for me, that's how we do it. But how we approach it is what matters, not the volume. The volume, I don't think we should have the whole amount in a year. We don't have the capacity. I don't think we have the capacity to absorb 50 billion in a year.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting that maybe, yes, we know there is a source to tap from. So every year we are going to take 2 billion or 5 billion each year over the next 10 years. That is how I expect this to be done.
But this is a
but not a bullet.
This is 100 years. The concept itself, you support the concept of your kids, your grandchildren will bear this for the next 100 years.
Yes, but my grandchildren come and benefit from the road. For instance, if you look at the Temamotoway, we didn't pay for it, but you and I enjoy it. Akosombo Dam, somebody paid for it, and we are enjoying it. So my point is, once we borrow and invest judiciously, not borrow to consume, but borrow and ensure that what is earmarked for is achieved at the least possible cost, I don't think posterity would be upset with us if they come to meet a debt and also come to meet an asset.
Okay. The IMF seems to actually support this long-term debt, going for loans that are spread over a long time. And because in this report, it says that continuous progress on fiscal structural reforms, particularly on public financial management and oversight over state-owned enterprises, is instrumental to anchor expenditure control and lasting fiscal discipline. It says access to new financing arrangements and longer-term debt instruments would help fund Ghana's pressing development and infrastructural needs. The IMF seems to endorse that. Do you need to have a longer-term debt arrangement that then helps you fund it? And I guess maybe government is taking a cue from this. The IMF, given a project credibility, they say we should go for longer term. We shouldn't be doing the 1 year, 2 year bonds that we do that at very high rates that kill our economy. Yeah,
sure. And you see, one other thing is that we can't plan. Most of the donor funding initially was every year. So you wait till another year when they tell you, well, I'm going to give you this. They mention the amount. Hand to mouth kind of thing. They don't even, sometimes it doesn't even come.
Yeah.
But this one is long-term, multi-year funding.
Yeah.
Where
so you know it's guaranteed, so you can plan.
You can plan
10, 15, 20 years down the line.
You can complete projects as well. So for me, and is it, when you borrow at such reasonable rates as well, it gives you the fiscal space to do other things, rather than this hand-to-mouth kind of monies. How much aid do we receive per capita? Sometimes, if you calculate, it's about $10 per person per year. I mean, Evans, if I gave you $10 a year, what transformation? How much will it change in your life on average? So, aid is a catalyst. It's like a drop, but then it has to be significant enough to be able to transform lives.
Yeah. So that's the aid. But what we stand currently in terms of our debt to GDP ratio, somewhere in the region of 70% of GDP, thereabout, plus or minus. Is this sustainable? Because I know the government is restructuring all of our debts, renegotiating so we can pay less interest rates on it. Where we stand now, looking to 2019, going to 2020, is the debt to GDP ratio one that alarms you or one that gives you comfort?
Well, now with the rebased GDP figures, that GDP ratio is about 57%.
57% GDP?
GDP, yes. That's the
rebase. It moved from,
because
69,
60s, yeah, now it's 57%. And let's be careful. We shouldn't hide behind the new GDP figures and borrow more. 57% is also quite high. We're close to 60%. And I don't think we should encourage more borrowing. Because if you look at it, although in terms of debt GDP is 57%, we pay in 2019, we're going to spend about 167 million or billion cedis.
Billion. Just on interest?
Yeah. I think on interest. Yeah. Interest rate. That is huge.
That's significant.
That's very significant. So, yes, the GDP number, that GDP numbers looks good. But look at how much you're going to spend just to service your debt. It leaves very little room after paying for wages and salaries and some of the statutory payments. Very little is left for capital expenditure. And that does not augur well for a country that wants to grow and transform lives.
That's an interesting one. And when we return from this break, 2018 has been a tumultuous year for the banking and the financial sector in general. I think in the history of this country, no year has seen such upheaval in this sector than we've seen this year alone. 5 indigenous banks went under. Government is doling out, is borrowing close to 13 billion cedis just to plug that hole. What's happening with the financial sector, particularly the indigenous Ghanaian local banking sector? People still don't have confidence in the banks. I must tell you, I for one, I have taken a lot of my monies from local banks and then put it in foreign banks because I just don't have confidence. And many people have done that. How do you restore confidence in the financial banking sector in 2019, looking at what has happened this year alone? And was it a prudent decision to go down this path in 2019? That's what we will be analyzing next when we return from the break. Stay with us. So live here on PM Express, we are assessing the 2018 financial year, the economy, and how it's performed. And also we were projecting, looking ahead into the 2019 fiscal year. Now, one of the key things that has happened in 2018, I guess one of the biggest topics in the economy, the financial sector, had to do with the banking sector very specifically. And it's the ripples of what happened, they're still being felt today because we have people who still have monies that they say are not being accessed, etc. The banking sector is still reeling under that shock. 5 banks collapsed this year. 5 banks, 5 indigenous banks. Unibank, one of the biggest of them all. We had Beige Capital, Beige Bank also going under. Sovereign Bank went under, and 2 other banks went under this year. And the government is pumping in billions of cedis, borrowed money, to try and fix the problem. 2019 is going to be critical because the building of confidence, the restoration of confidence in the banking sector, particularly for local banks, is a long-term one. And whether they can do that in 2019 remains to be seen. But Prof, I guess for me, this is one of the biggest challenges this economy faced this year, because if wrongly handled, it had a potential collapse in this whole economy. We saw what happened in the U.S. The banking, the world financial crisis in 2017, 2018 was fundamentally because of the banking challenge that in the U.S. and the contagion that we saw in Europe, etc. Banks were going under. The subprime mortgage crisis collapsed a lot of banks, and then we saw the whole global financial system falling. So that's where we were this year when the banks had challenges. First of all, your own assessment of that problem that we faced this year and how critical it was that we passed that test.
I think the banking sector challenges didn't start
this year.
This year.
Yeah.
Way back in 2016, this issue was flagged. I think there was a banking sector report. Then the IMF was even pushing for government to implement some of the regulatory, enforce some of the regulations. I suspect because we were going to an election, it was not prudent to do that at the time. If we had not done, the central bank had not done what it did or is doing now, the whole system will come to a halt. If you recall, in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, when banks were going down, you wake up one day and you hear this bank has been closed and people go and queue and there's a rush on the bank. And I don't think we are witnessing that now. Now what we are seeing is banks that cannot operate as banks are being closed, so that those that can keep our money safe are being encouraged to do so. So now if you look at total assets and growth in deposits within the banking system, it's gone up. So it doesn't mean confidence has waned. Rather, it is.
But you're not disaggregating that between foreign banks as against local banks. It's grown in which of these two sectors? It's
not about foreign. There are some local banks which are also strong, and their deposits are growing.
Are growing, okay.
Yes, ADB's deposits is grown. Fidelity's bank, Ghana Commercial Bank. We have Car Bank. We have Car Bank is now even going to buy is it Energy Bank or one of these banks? Yeah. So it tells you, I don't think that the issue should be a distinction between local and foreign banks. Yes, some local banks did not operate as banks. Bad corporate governance, use of, wrong use of finances, and I think it is about time we support whatever is going on, and we embrace it and make sure that at the end of the day we have a much more robust banking system. I am more confident in what is going on, and I am happy it is being done.
So that's the question. You endorsed what happened this year, the collapse of these banks, and then turn them around and put into one company?
Certainly. If you saw the books, I mean, there was no way they would. It's not sustainable. They're going to collapse, and we're going to lose our deposits. Now, with what we're having, and at least government has come in to guarantee our deposits for us. Can you imagine if one bank had gone down, customers have lost their deposits? The ripple effect on the economy, it would have been more disastrous.
But so, what about the confidence?
Yeah, I think confidence should, I mean, you saw the rating.
Confidence took a hit.
Yeah, it took a hit. But once we see that, at least you are sure that your deposit is safe, your confidence should be there. It should go up. Rather, I think we are being told or being educated that it's not anything you see that you go and put your money in. We should be more financially literate. And that is where education comes in. I expect that as we're doing all what we're doing, there is a unit, like whether the NCC or Bank of Ghana, or there should be a unit that is educating people about financial literacy in both in English and in the local languages. Because there are quite a number of people who are confused.
Yeah.
They think the system is going down. It is not going down. It's rather being strengthened. And I think we need to educate people on where to invest and where not to invest. We should bear in mind that the higher the return, the higher the risk. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to give 30% per month, ask yourself, what kind of serious business is that person going to engage in and get a return, pay for its overheads and everything, and still give you 30% interest on your capital? It's not feasible. It will collapse. So we need that education as much as possible.
2019, what do you expect? What are prospects for the banking sector as far as you're concerned? Because that sector carries us all.
2019, I expect to see a much more robust banking system. I expect to see interest rates going down. If all the
That's a critical one.
All the macro fundamentals are kept or maintained. Why am I saying that? All these 24 or 22 banks that have raised their minimum capital, 400 million.
It's no joke.
It's no joke. So there's going to be a lot of liquidity in the system. Yeah. So banks will have to we have nothing to do than to lend. And once there's that competition, it will drive down interest rate. At the moment, they have streamlined their credit appraisal. I mean, this year in particular is like a cleaning process for the banks. So they are streamlining their credit appraisal processes, retraining their staff and making sure they are minimizing risk and whatever. But I expect 2019 to be a period where they launch into active business. And we should see a reduction in lending rates. We should see a much more robust banking system in 2019.
And you touch on something that we're going to carry into 2019 is the deadline is fast approaching for the banks to raise their minimum capital to 400 million. Some of them have said they've done it. Some of them I know we are in active conversations to try and merge to meet the deadline. There's expectation that some of them might, the Bank of Ghana has said that if you cannot meet it, there is no other room for you. Either you back out, you merge, or you drop into a lower tier. Maybe savings and loans, and microfinance, whatever it is. For those who can't meet it, what's your own reading of what might happen by December 1st of January, when the deadline kicks in? Because certainly not all the banks can meet it, because 400 million is a lot of money.
Yeah. All the options you mentioned are possible. There could be takeovers. Recently we've had Car Bank taking over Energy. Energy says cannot meet it. Yeah. So you find some takeovers. We'll find some forced mergers or forced marriages. The central bank has developed some guidelines to ensure that if you cannot meet it, then you'll be forced to merge or go into a forced marriage, if I may put it that way. We'll find others, stepping down to savings and loan. So all these options are going to be available, and we will see them in place when we hit 2019. But I think the central bank, I don't expect the central bank to extend the deadline. Once it has seen considerable progress, you are just about meeting it, or you are just about merging, fine, they can have a roadmap with you and get to ensure that, yes, whatever has to be done is done. But to extend again, in my view, is not appropriate. See, banking is a serious business. When you lose your money, I don't know whether you've lost your money to any bank or any person, anybody before.
I'm a low risk taker.
Yeah, I same like me. But if you lose your money, there's a ripple effect. Your dependence, and it has a huge impact. Assuming you're a pensioner, you save towards your pension and you lose it. It can send people to your early graves. It can give people all kinds of diseases. And so, if you are not ready, you are not ready. Don't come and toil with people's lives by playing chess with, funds. We need to be serious with banking, because finance is the engine, is the fuel that basically the economy runs on. It has repercussions on all the other sectors.
True.
The media, we saw in the media when this thing was going on.
True.
There were job losses in the media. There were job losses everywhere. So we have to take this serious and enforce the regulations as much as possible.
2019, what do you think government's focus should be, priority should be, as far as the economy is concerned? Which areas should they focus more on going into this very important year?
Aside the ensuring the macro fundamentals are met, government has two major initiatives that, for me, it has to find the money and get them rolling. One is the one district, one factory concept. Brilliant idea, but the implementation is slow in my view. I expect to see more factories being set up so that it can create jobs, it can put money in people's pockets. So that's one area that I expect a lot of focus. Then also planting for food and jobs. Another great area where we need to invest more, get food production to go up. But it shouldn't just be production. It should be the value chain process. So otherwise, anytime we have this problem where anytime food production goes up, there's a glut, prices fall, farmers feel dissatisfied, discouraged. And then the following year, they don't invest more because they didn't get much from their revenue. If you tackle the value chain process from production, marketing, storage, processing, we do all of this, then the farmer would continue to have confidence in the economy and reinvest. So for me, these are the two areas. Then at the back of that is infrastructure development. Our level of infrastructure is not the best, and they keep deteriorating over time. So we need to move into infrastructure development. That will propel industries, that will propel agriculture. And I believe if these are done, and some of the initiatives in the budget are achieved, I'm sure Ghanaians will be happy.
Confident about 2019 then?
I'm confident in 2019, certainly confident, granted that nothing untoward happens.
Okay.
Very confident in 2019.
Prof, thank you very much for talking to us.
My pleasure.
We look forward to 2019 and see if Prof's predictions and hope will be fulfilled. My name is Evans Mensah.